mic are you using, Pete? The one on your left or your right?
What's that?
Which mic are you using? The one on your left or your right?
My right.
Very good. It's activated.
I got the red mic.
And go.
Good morning. This is Peter Reese again for another special edition of WNY Reach. Today's topic is going to be xenophobia in Lackawanna, and perhaps more appropriately, it should have been labeled as government xenophobia in Lackawanna. Just so you don't have to Google it, xenophobia is the fear of people from far away. We have a couple of distinguished guests here today. We have Afaf Nasher, who is the executive director of CARE New York. She will be speaking for that organization. And we have Mr. Abraham Nasser of Lackawanna, who is halfway on the route to becoming a lawyer and hopefully being able to do something about government xenophobia in Lackawanna. I kind of want to set the setting for this and then get out of the way if I can, because I'm not from Lackawanna. And in case you hadn't noticed, I am a practicing white privilege practitioner. I am so white privileged, I even dyed my hair white. The geographic and political layout of the city of Lackawanna essentially is as follows. On the far western side is Lake Erie, and that's where the old steel mills and the old broken down former industrial sites were. That's why there's a city of Lackawanna, because of the mills that were there. As you move further away from the lake to the east, the wards of the city go 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the socioeconomic level goes up 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you're in 3, you're in a higher level than if you're in 1. Traditionally, and going back many years, the first ward, closest to the steel mills, closest to the lake, was the area where poor people, black people, and Yemeni Muslims lived. And there is a huge railroad yard and a huge bridge that goes across and essentially leads you from the first ward out of it into the second, third, and fourth wards. And that bridge became famous in a case in 1970, which is known as Kennedy Parks v. Lackawanna. The attorney who represented the Diocese of Buffalo, the Catholic diocese that was involved in trying to build a low-income housing project out of the first ward, in other words, to allow the people on the western side of the bridge to cross over and get to the better part of town, was Charles S. Desmond, who just happened to be an adjunct UB Law School professor. I met the man in 1970. Very distinguished individual. He was a former chief judge of the New York State Court of Appeals. Back in the days when we elected judges, he was actually elected once as chief judge unopposed. That's how distinguished he was and how highly his opinion was held. And in essence, what happened when these people attempted to, a group of people or organizations attempted to build low-income housing, the other side of the bridge, they were strenuously opposed by the city government, which redistricted, they rezoned the property where they're going to buy these or build these homes as a park and recreation area. They made a park out of it, and they also put a moratorium in on any new subdivisions. The allegation was that was proved, which the court agreed with, that this was done to deny decent housing to low-income and minority families. This was pretty astounding behavior even then, and we're talking 50 years ago. Things have changed a lot, but even then, this is really drastic. And Charles Desmond was a hero. I'm dedicating this show to his memory. Former law professor. What I'd like to have now is have the killer line that really ended this, and this is from the United States Court of Appeals Second Circuit. That's as far as it got. They quote from a 1917 case of theirs. And it says that there exists a serious and difficult problem arising from a feeling of race hostility, which the law is powerless to control and to which it must give a measure of consideration may be freely admitted, but its solution cannot be promoted by deriving citizens of their constitutional rights and privileges. They then affirmed the ruling of the case below, and the city was stopped and prevented from barring this. But there is a history and a tradition in Lackawanna that goes back an awful long way of xenophobic and racial discrimination. If we fast forward to 2001, we had 9/11, we had the Lackawanna 6, all hell broke loose for Muslims in Lackawanna, quite frankly, and that's probably another whole show. I'm not going to get into that. In 2002, we had the United States v. Mohammed al-Banna, an individual, a distinguished individual in the community who was convicted of transferring money back to Yemen without a license. That's it, a non-scienter crime, i.e. no guilty mind. There was never any connection to terrorism or any kind of wrongdoing. It was people in Lackawanna getting money back to their families in the old country to try to help them survive. He spent 4.5 years in a federal prison for that. Fast forward 2017, Mohammed Albana, the same person, out of prison, still an honored community member, runs and wins election in the first ward of Lackawanna. This is after a general election. At that time, Jeffrey Szymanski was the mayor of Lackawanna, and he, on his own initiative, without any interaction with the Common Council, decided that he was going to enforce a city ordinance that said, in effect, anyone who has ever been convicted of a crime or offense involving moral turpitude could not be an elected official or employee of Lackawanna. The crime that Mohammed Albana was convicted of was not a crime involving moral turpitude. It couldn't be by definition because he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. The mayor of Lackawanna spent $87,000 to litigate and knock Mohammed Albana out of a seat that he had won as chosen by the voters after general election. If Mr. Albana had served for the 4 years as a council member in the first ward, he would have received $60,000 in pay, $15,000 a year. So that taxpayers' money was used by Jeffrey Szymanski to knock a treasured member of the Muslim community out. And quite frankly, that was I litigated that case on behalf of Mr. Albana. As far as we know, this is the only incidence in the history of the United States of America where someone has been disqualified for holding an office after they were elected by the voters. That actually involved 2 lawsuits, and we'll do a show on that. Let's move forward to 2020. We have Democratic committee races. The same Jeffrey Szymanski is now no longer mayor, having been term limited out. He now has a posh patronage job working for the county executive, but he is the city chairman of the Democratic Party. Now, when you're the city chairman of the Democratic Party, you essentially control who gets elected to office. The Republicans haven't been able to win an election in Lackawanna in anybody's memory. I think it was back to the 50s. That's almost outside of my memory. And I've actually had judges tell me in court that for all practical intents and purposes, if you get the Democratic endorsement, if you win the Democratic primary, you're the elected official. So the city of Lackawanna is or the Democratic committee is exercising governmental powers. Mr. Szymanski decided, well, he was running for re-election as chairman of the Democratic committee. He was running a slate of committeemen. The way this works in each election district, there's 2 Democratic committeemen. If you get your guys elected, hopefully they vote for you and you keep your job as city chairman, which he was. In monitoring the results of the race, remember 2020 is the year of the absentee, he decided to challenge 200 Arab names, 200 Arab voters' names who purportedly had cast absentee ballots which he alleged were invalid. He claimed that these people had asked for absentee ballots and cast them, and they didn't have a right to under the election law. Now, this was done under a principle of a case which is actually a reform. It's King v. Smith, and I was the one that forced the Erie County Board of Elections to allow this proceeding to take place. I forced them to do this in an election in 2007. It's a 2003 case. Basically, all it is a preservation thing. You go and look at the ballots and you say, we don't think Joe Smith is eligible to vote. We file an objection. They preserve the ballot. If that ballot matters later, if the election's close enough that it comes off on 1 vote, you might go to court and litigate whether have the court decide whether Joe Smith really could vote or not. We can then, because that ballot's been identified, even though it's been kept secret, we can go back and pull his ballot out and see if it makes a difference. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but the idea, there was actually one Polish guy there too, and I'm Polish, and it was really astounding. And I said, my God, why did they pick this one poor Polish guy? And they said, oh, he's been known to be friendly to Arabs. So every name objected to was either an Arab or someone who happened to be friendly with the Arab community in Lackawanna. This was rather glaring. It left it quite frankly left me shaken. I foiled this document. Within an hour of the time I foiled it, having become made aware of it by someone who saw him filing the objections. Within an hour, Mr. Szymanski withdrew the objections. So he's not objecting, but when you filed a document, you can't unfile it. I got it according to the Freedom of Information law. This is a synopsis of the document. It's actually 11 pages long. He filed a group of objections for each election district, purportedly on behalf of the people who were his committee guys running. And like what you're seeing here is the 1st Ward, 2nd District. 2 people are named there. They're supposedly his guys. And you can see what he says there. It's very clear. I've eliminated the list of names of the people because I don't know who they are and I don't want to put them on the internet. But quite frankly, this is a public document. You can go get it yourself if you want it. Mr. Szymanski signed this as the chairman of the Democratic Party in his official capacity, even using his old Mayor Szymanski email, his private email. At this point, being rather stunned, I attempted to reach out to various media sources, et cetera, and that's when I got to CARE, and I got to Afaf Nasha. And so at that point, we worked together, and I'm kind of going to turn it over to Afaf at this point. But, Peter, if you can post a quote from her press release, that'd probably be helpful. And Afaf, now it's yours. Carry the ball from here. Where did you go from here?
The opportunity. Thank you to all the people that are working on the back end. So, Peter, like you said, you and I met over this Lackawanna voting suppression issue. Essentially, we received a phone call from various Muslim constituents in the Lackawanna County area. They basically called and said, hey, this is the situation. We know this attorney, Peter, who's been working with us. Why don't you give him a call? And from there, obviously, we got updated on everything. And what we have seen in this is that, Peter, we were just as astounded as you were to see 200 names on a list and have every single one of them overtly Muslim Arab or, Arab or Muslim, right? Because it was full of Ahmeds and Mohammeds and Abdul so-and-so and whatnot. This was not something that could possibly be conceived as anything other than pulling out Muslim or Arab sounding names. You
didn't see many Sally Johnsons or Bob Smiths on that list, did you?
No, we did not. And it would be unfortunate to see the voters' will to be disrespected for anyone, but to see a specific ethnicity or a specific religion being targeted was just, I can't say shocking because I am in the civil rights, business, Peter, and this is the kind of thing we see all the time. But to see it this blatant, I think, was a little bit hard to swallow. And so, from there on, of course, we've been talking to constituents. There are a number of things that are going on. We've contacted the New York State Attorney General's office, Letitia James, and they have initiated an investigation and have sought some answers from Szymanski and others. And then, of course, as well as I know that there is potentially, a criminal matter that is being investigated as well. So we're fighting this on several fronts. And I'm really glad that you've been able to talk about this here on this podcast because, as you noted, we got some media attention around this, but nearly not enough as it deserved. So definitely happy to be talking about this as well as all kinds of forms of discrimination and civil rights abuses that Muslims regularly face.
All right. I want to add here, one of the reasons why WNY Reach exists, it's reasonably new. We are a resurrection of an old 501c3 that it was a local newspaper that specialized in investigative reporting of things that the mainline media just weren't covering. And one of the reasons why WNY Reach exists is because of what happened in Lackawanna. I want to tie in Abraham Nasser now because I knew Abraham. I'd met him politically. I knew he was in law school, but I didn't know him particularly well. And I just flipped him this list of voters, And I said, Abraham, what do you think? So, Abraham, what did you think when you got the list?
So at first, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, there has to be a reason why this was done, because I know in elections, usually people, they object to certain people to win elections, kind of how it goes. But then when I read the list and I saw page after page after page after page after page, all with a certain group of people's names, then I'm like, this has to be a little fishy. Then I looked at the address. One of the addresses on the list happened to be my address, but I didn't live there. But the people who we objected to didn't live there. I lived there. They used to live there before me. So I told Peter, I said, hey, either somebody voted wrongly, or he just went to the Board of Elections and got all the names of Arab or Muslim names. And he's like, okay, let me get back to you. I'm going to check up on this. He goes down to the Board of Elections. He gets the document that Szymanski, wait, you didn't...
Actually, what I did, Abraham, I had the document which I'd sent to you, and I then investigated whether, in fact, these people actually had applied for absentee ballots. Now, the people you mentioned to me at the time, well, gee, we've lived here since 2011, and these people are gone. They moved somewhere else. We know where they live now. Well, I checked the voter history database, and, in fact, they hadn't voted since 2011. And now I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Did they really try to vote absentee? Did they cast ballots? And contrary to what some of the nonsense you hear, it's not that easy to vote absentee. You got to be a registered voter. You got to ask for the absentee ballot. You got to fill it out. You got to get it back in certain envelopes, time, etc. So it's really a two-step process. Well, the truth of the matter is those people did not ask for an absentee ballot and did not cast one. Well, now I'm ringing bells here. And I actually took a day. This took me about 10 days to get permission from the Board of Elections because I think, quite frankly, I'm a little skeptical. I don't think they wanted me to come down and look. That's number one. Our boards of elections are controlled by Republicans and Democrats. Mr. Szymanski's the Democratic power hitter. They like to protect people like that. But eventually I got down there to see the envelopes of the absentee ballots. Now, the envelopes are just the shell that the ballot came in, but I can tell who voted from that. And I ran the entire list, and approximately of 200 names, 100 of these people did not apply for an absentee ballot and didn't cast one. They were registered voters, however. For some reason, the Board of Elections didn't kick these people off the voter registration list, even though they hadn't voted since 2011. And, that's a mystery to me, but that's the Board of Elections' fault, not these people or anyone else. Well, now I'm sitting here saying, wow, I have 100 statements filed, or essentially 100 allegations of people who illegally voted an absentee ballot, but they didn't. Now, that means somebody just didn't bother. They didn't go down and look at the envelopes like Pete did. They just made something up from a list. I still can't quite figure out how this happened, though, because he didn't object to every Arab name. And, names are a little funny. If a woman marries a person who's an Arab, she changes her name, and, it might look like she's an Arab. So I don't know where this list came from. But it then came out that some of the people that this guy, Mr. Szymanski, allegedly did this on behalf of said, I didn't have anything to do with that. I don't want my name on that document. One of them I spoke to personally. He said, I don't know what the guy's doing. So at that point in time, we went to the Erie County DA, and if we can flip that one graphic up, we'll let the voters at home take a look at this. But there is a crime in New York. And there's several levels of this. Now you got to go back to offering. It's that one, offering a false instrument for filing in the second degree. It's a misdemeanor in New York State to offer a false instrument to a public body for filing. You can read it. It's in plain English. And boy, it sure looks like somebody offered a false instrument for filing me. And not only was it false 100 times plus.
Can you explain briefly what a false instrument is? Because some people might not know what a false instrument is.
It's a document that has inaccurate information on it. you just can't take a shot in the dark. I mean, I'll tell you what, Abraham, how about if I print you out a list of all the Democratic voters in Lackawanna next year, and you file it, and we'll say we think all these people filed asked to vote absentee and didn't. You'd be charged criminally, so would I. We'd be charged with conspiracy to muck up the Board of Elections. And by the way, there's real consequences when you file these objections. In order to for the board to effectuate these objections, they actually have to open the envelopes, copy the ballot, do this in secret, of course, and mark the ballots, secret them away, put the original back in the envelope, reseal it, et cetera, because there's a specific time and a procedure for opening the envelopes. And this actually is a good thing if you really think that there's fraudulent voting activity going on. But some of this stuff also, I mean, there were Muslim candidates who were running for the committee, and they and their whole family had their absentee ballots objected to. Or there was just nonsense. This is just a shotgun across the water. There was no reason for this. It was garbage. But, it's probably still legal. However, when you get into a false document, I mean, don't do this. Don't file false documents with a public body. There are real consequences, and there's no such thing as unfiling something. When it's filed, it's filed. It's there forever. And you can go down and foil this document if you'd like to get the whole thing yourself. Like I said, we're not going to put it on the air. So now we're chasing the...
So, Peter, before you go on, I just wanted to say, there definitely are real consequences, adding to what you were saying, because when we think about the consequences to the Muslim community as well, what is felt by the Muslim community is not only that they've been targeted, but also that in becoming civically engaged, in becoming an empowered community, in engaging with their community and with their government to be a part of the solution, to be a part of the democratic process, they are really being targeted because of their up and coming power within the community. And that speaks volume, number one, as to their own purposefulness and becoming civically engaged, obviously, but it also speaks volumes as to those local actors who may want to make sure that others, people of color, and in particular here, Muslim Americans in Lackawanna, do not become engaged and do not seek change within those that are currently in authority. And that is problematic, obviously, to say the least, not just for Muslims, but really for our democracy. What does that say to the health of our democracy when a minority can be targeted in such a manner and their votes can be suppressed in this way? And we should also mention to all those that are listening that when your vote is cast away like this, essentially is disregarded, they were not given the opportunity to challenge this absentee ballot challenge either, right? So they didn't even know about it. So what this really meant was that potentially how many votes were discarded in this manner. You and I, Peter, know that you could only pull up 2 years of information, but how many years has this been going on? How many votes have been suppressed? How many tight elections have had different outcomes because of such, I don't know what to call it. We believe it's allegedly illegal action, but hopefully, the investigations will conclude and to show what we suspect it to be.
Well, I'm concerned about the intimidation and then the annoyance here. I mean, I've been involved in politics for a long time. My wife and I have passed designating petitions, and I mean, we are holier than Caesar's wife when we do it. Our paper is clean. And, the candidates we support will get sued, and there are allegations that, we committed fraud. We intimidated people to get them to sign us. And quite frankly, I don't like that because that's garbage. That's nonsense. And I know that lawyers throw allegations back and forth in legal pleadings, but, I mean, if you're a Lackawanna voter, do you really want to know that the city chairman on the Democratic side, who has real power, has decided to target your ballot? I mean, even if you cast one, but even more so if you haven't cast one. Now, as an example of what you were saying, there's one gentleman who was an EMT, and he has adopted an abbreviated form of signature, which is actually different than the one that he had on his poll card when he originally registered to vote. The last 3 elections, as I recall, his ballot was thrown out and he never knew it. And unfortunately, in New York State, that can't happen anymore. There was a law passed this year that you do get a chance to try to revive your ballot, et cetera. And all it's going to be necessary is for him to, send in a new signature card, et cetera. And then he did the abbreviated signature, just so you know, because EMTs have to sign a lot of documents. And he didn't want to write out his whole name. It was taking too long. The commissioner of elections on the Democratic side, Jeremy Zellner, told one of the reporters from a local radio station that it had always been their policy to notify people when their absentee ballots were not counted. That is a bald-faced lie. That has never happened before. It's legally required to now. And I don't care if it was their policy. Their policy was not to do anything. And there was a race in 2009 where Mr. Szymanski actually got elected the first time, Democratic primary race. Again, that's the one that matters. He ran against Dion Watkins. He won by 14 votes. Typically, it looks like we're getting 10 to 20 Muslim votes thrown out every year, or were in the past. Over objections like this. We don't like the signature, et cetera, and no one knew about it. So it's been lost to the sands of time as to whether Dion Watkins actually beat Mr. Szymanski in 2009. We will never be able to go back and recreate that. I wasn't involved at that time in this particular race, but I remember it clearly. And, people will be left to speculate forever as to whether Mr. Szymanski was ever legitimately the mayor of Lackawanna. Now, Abraham, you're laughing, so chime in. Come on, tell me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm starting to wonder if he was actually the mayor the last 8 years. I know in Lackawanna there's like this part of the city charter is you can't serve for, I think it's 2 uninterrupted terms.
Correct.
So I think he's setting a precedent now where he already served 2 terms as councilman. Then there was a break. Now he's serving again. We might have him as another. He might run to be mayor again.
That's correct.
Maybe this time it'll be legitimate. Who knows? But I think we should pivot to what happened after we kind of brought this to light. Incident at the
there's one other thing that I want to throw up here, and then you guys can beat on it all you want. I'm a very suspicious guy. Now it was when his term ran out. I think it was either January. Well, his term. He was done in office January 1st of this year. January 2nd, I think the county executive Mark Poloncarz appointed him to an $87,000 a year job as executive director for workforce development in Erie County, whatever that means. It turns out he works for a not-for-profit corporation, totally government funded. And there's some interesting components to that, but I'm a foiler kind of guy, so my wife decided to file a FOIL. We'll get into that sometime as to why she does it rather than me. But the long and the short of it is we went after the Workforce Investment Board, and we said, gee, we'd like to see his timesheets because it seems like he's spending a lot of time at the Board of Elections to be in this important a job. And we kind of like to know what his timesheets look like. We've got one of them here. There were 2 days we know he was at the Board of Elections. One was when he propounded these objections. That was June 30th. He did take 8 hours of leave that day. But on January 9th, he witnessed the counting of the absentee ballots by the machines. I know because I was there. There was another Lackawanna representative from Voice there, and there were people from a race representing a lady that I was representing out of Rochester, running the state Senate race. He didn't take any leave credit at all that day, and he had to have been at the board at least 2-3 hours. His office is miles away from the Board of Elections. It's not across the street. But if you can slide up a little bit on that daily attendance record there, interestingly enough, it appears that he signs his own timesheets. Which is kind of, I wish I had a job like this. And if you look at the bottom, he's kind of, you can't see it all because the 3-hole punch has kind of knocked it out. But it basically says falsification of this record will result in administrative action and or criminal prosecution. He signs one of these every day for his department and himself. It appears that there's about 60 of these. We got 2 months under FOIL. There's about 60 of these. It appears that he's granted himself overtime. And I'm fascinated to look into that, because maybe if he spent less time at the Board of Elections, he wouldn't have had to use up that overtime. And it really would be nice to know just what it is that he does in this job, because it's down in the Larkin building, and I've been there, and there's never anybody there. I've served papers on them, the foils and other things, and I've got pictures. I just had to slip something under the door because there wasn't anybody working there. I asked the gentleman in the downstairs watching the lobby whether there was ever anybody there, and he said, sometimes on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. So, this is a nice job to have while you're a political operative, conducting discriminatory activities which negatively impact the Yemeni community in your city. So, I mean, this is. I've gotten this to the Erie County DA also. I spoke with the ADA who's handling this recently, and he says they're investigating. And I pretty much said, "What are you investigating? I've handed you a documentary case. Either decide to do something or don't." Now, I think I'm going. Well, I may have one more about the Yemen field incident, but this is your ball from this point on. I mean, I'm a recovering Catholic, a nice Polish kid who grew up in the city of Tonawanda. So this is not my game. You guys tell me, and tell us what CARE can do and what CARE should be doing and would be doing with respect to this sort of thing in the future.
So, Peter, here's the deal. I mean, Muslim Americans have been facing a lot of xenophobia, a lot of Islamophobia, which is basically an irrational fear of Muslims, right? That is not just a fear, but actually discriminatory in action as well. We're speaking about this, but this is one example of what Muslim Americans face. And I know one of the reasons you brought our young, soon-to-be attorney here as well is because he himself has grown up under a cloud of discrimination. And unfortunately, as much as I am horrendously shocked by the blatant discrimination, what we believe is blatant discrimination here with the voter suppression, the truth is that Muslim Americans face a whole lot of xenophobia and Islamophobia on a daily basis. And it's in every realm of life, Peter. And I can certainly give you lots of examples of that. And I'm sure others can as well. Just within CARE's work, again, CARE, for those that don't know, is the Council on American Islamic Relations. And I'm with CARE New York, which is the New York chapter of CARE. So our jurisdiction basically looks at discriminatory matters that occur within New York State. And the things that we see every day is it's just unbelievable, and it is on a daily basis, and things that many people who are not Muslim may not even face exist. And I'll give you some examples. Right now, just recently, one of our CARE chapters did a school bullying survey. So let's take it to the youth, and then we'll just keep going higher and higher from there. Our youth themselves say that 28% of them, this is Muslim youth basically from 11 years old to about 18 years old, 28% of them say they don't even feel comfortable letting other people know that they're Muslim because of the amount of bullying that goes on in schools. And the religious-based bullying I'm talking about, this is not just, oh, you don't look cool enough because you don't have the latest pair of shoes. This is religious-based bullying. As a matter of fact, it happens not just from peer to peer, but actually oftentimes administrators are the forces of the unfortunately discriminatory and bullying behavior within schools. 35% of them say that they have seen their peers make offensive comments about Muslims and Islam. 48% of 12th graders have reported being bullied because of their faith, right? So that's school. Let's switch it over to the workplace, Peter. And by the way, this is more than double the national average of bullying. As an FYI, just to give you sort of the parameters and the scheme of what it's like for Muslim Americans versus, the average Peter Reese. In the workplace, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a couple of years ago published a report, and they said that about a quarter of their complaints come from Muslims, right? And that is astounding in and of itself, because for those that don't know, unfortunately we're in the news so much for all the wrong reasons, but for those that don't know, Muslims in America only comprise about 2 to 3% of the entire American population. Wow. So if 24% almost a quarter of all Americans are facing workplace discrimination, that's enough to make anybody's head reel. And, it's fine to give statistics, but just to give you examples of what that means, we have a sister right now who Care National is litigating for. It's a hijab workplace discrimination. Essentially, she was not wearing a hijab, which is a covering for your hair, a headscarf, essentially. And at some point, she decided that she wanted to wear it. One of her bosses actually told her she looks like a terrorist now. They gave her an ultimatum, told her you either take it off or don't come back. She refused to take it off. She got fired. That's a lawsuit. Right here in New York, we have a 19-year-old whose boss, she was working at a city university in one of their offices there part-time while she was a student. Her boss, one of her administrators, basically, mocked her and told her that essentially, he was mocking her for her religious convictions not to drink. He mocked her faith on more than one time. He humiliated her, and eventually she left that office. That's a lawsuit. We see discrimination in our prison systems. Of course, we have a brother, unfortunately, who was in this past Ramadan, which is the holy month for Muslims of fasting. They refused to give him meals during his iftar, which is the time that you break your fast. For 8 days, he basically was starving, begging them for food, and they refused, saying that they would only feed him during the daylight hours when he's supposed to be fasting. That's a lawsuit in the works, Peter. In the financial section, we have lawsuits right now pending and stemming out of Care New York's work. So there's a phenomenon called banking while Muslim. There's also a phenomenon called flying while Muslim, and I'll touch on both of them. For the banking while Muslim one, we're in litigation with Citibank and Venmo. Essentially, there are discriminatory policies where we're seeing our community members targeted for closed accounts, no reasons given, by the way, but they have accounts closed. They have essentially sometimes what we have seen is that people who will apply for an account, we had one person apply for an account, everything seemed to go fine, green light until she was going to put her husband on the account. She was a white woman with a white sounding name. She then put on her husband's name on the application, and all of a sudden we ran into issues and they refused the account. We have another situation in which a sister went into a restaurant. This restaurant was called Al-Aqsa Restaurant in reference to the mosque in Jerusalem. And essentially she Venmo'd her portion of the check to the person who paid the bill. Venmo refused the transaction because of the name of the restaurant, essentially signaling, hey, if you're going to a restaurant that sounds overtly Muslim or has some sort of like a reference to a Muslim anything of religious significance, we're going to investigate it before we even allow the transaction to go through. That's a lawsuit that's happening. Flying while Muslim, Peter, look, if you are nervous about flying and you say a little prayer, or if you text in Arabic and the person next to you sees it, or if your mom calls you and she's saying, honey, I missed you, please, make sure you call me when you get back, and you happen to say words like inshallah, which means God willing, I'll call you back, which, by the way, is very common for Muslims to always reference God in the way that they speak. So we've had whole families kicked off of planes because people around them feel uncomfortable because they saw them text in Arabic, or because they made a reference, to Islam or anything or something of that source, right? So, those are issues that we face every single day. And I'm not even talking about law enforcement. FBI issues, Peter, really throughout the country, probably almost on an everyday basis. There's always somebody calling us and saying, hey, there's an FBI knocking on our door. And two recent egregious cases, one was under the guise of a law enforcement agent who went to an imam. An imam is the religious equivalent of, let's say, a priest at a church, right? There are differences, but that's the equivalent that people can understand. And essentially, they went under this guise of speaking to him about community affairs. He welcomes them in. He figured, it's good for us to be involved with the community, with our local law enforcement. That conversation ended with that law enforcement agent essentially telling him to spy on certain community people of a specific ethnicity. So that's how community affairs worked their way into him. And he eventually called us, and we're now involved with that. We have a sister. I remember this story because it was just, again, one of those blatantly discriminatory acts. we have a sister. If anybody knows Muslims, they dress like me, they cover up. We don't necessarily go to the beach because we don't wear bathing suits. So a group of sisters decided that they were going to rent out a home. It was a vacation home, and the reason they did that is because there is a private swimming pool on the perimeter. And so they enjoyed themselves for a week, whatever it was. They went back home. Don't you know, Peter, that she got a knock on the door by FBI agents inquiring as to why she rented that home. And she told them the purpose. And she's like, well, I'm sorry, but the neighbors thought it suspicious that a woman with headscarf would be in their neighborhood. Right. So these are the things that could flag an FBI visit when you're a Muslim. It's very sad. But ultimately, we have to also not forget about hate crimes and immigration issues. I don't want to take up the entire thing. I really want to bring other voices onto this. But, hate crimes, we have two right now, a 19-year-old that was beaten with a bat by one of his neighbors. And then we have another brother who was beaten up and hospitalized very severely as well. My first case with CARE New York was of the imam and his assistant who was murdered in broad daylight walking out of a mosque, right, in a hate crime. Eventually, that person got convicted and is serving, in prison. But my point is, Peter, is that, this is very, very real to us. Voter suppression is just one part of it. And we face discriminatory actions and xenophobia and Islamophobia really on a daily basis. And there's just no way to escape it. And those that are younger than me, I remember obviously 9/11 very clearly. I was already, an adult. But those that were born thereafter have had this cloud of suspicion hung over them simply by being born into this country and having an Islamic or Muslim identity. And that's really sad to know that a whole generation has seen all of these actions that I described as a normal part of their life, because it should never be normal for anyone to face this kind of discrimination.
Well, to be honest with you, and again, I'm the king of white privilege. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I find it incredible that this is happening in my country. I mean, this is not my country. I cannot believe this, but I don't experience it. And I think it's very important that we have programs like this, and there are people like you to help expose it. Now, I want to personalize this with Abraham here. Abraham, tell us what's happened to you. I mean, what's your first memory? What was your first pleasant memory when you were a young child? Mine. Just so you know, I was running through the fields with some friends in a housing project that we lived in at the time, and it was a very pleasant memory. We were like flying. We were having a really good time, and it was a sunny day. People have their first memory around their time. They're 4 or 5 years old. What's your first memory?
So I just remember, kind of similar to your story, I was playing outside and my mom was watching us. I was about 4 at the time. I was 4, my brother was 6, my older sister was 9. And we were playing outside, and then my mom gets a phone call, and I see her run into the house and turn on the news. And I just remember seeing this burning building on TV. And I never understood what was going on and why everyone was so frantic and nervous. And now I know it was 9/11, and I just remember everybody being so nervous, and it just wasn't a good day for anyone who was an American that day. The next day, 2 FBI agents show up to my house with their blue jackets on and the yellow FBI. They show my mom their badge. They put the badges back in their pockets, turn around, and walk away. They don't say a word.
What does your mom do for a living?
My mom is a school teacher.
So she's a professional person. She's very well educated.
Yeah. So
why were they there? I mean, to put you in your place? Did they think your mom was a terrorist? She was going to teach terror to grammar school or whatever?
I don't know. But the point is, I didn't know if it was, now that I'm older and I remember that, I just think to myself, was it to intimidate us? Were they sent there to do something bad and then realized, we probably shouldn't do this and walked away? I don't know. That's one of my early childhood memories. Another thing was there was a wedding going on, and I just had made a Twitter account, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, can you just tweet this date, because we want to get we want this to go trend." The state trend.
What's the date? Was the date of the wedding? Is that it?
Yeah, it was the date of the wedding.
So it's a happy event. You're tweeting.
Yeah, So 2 days before that date, the FBI and a whole bunch of like the SWAT teams at my house, and they're like, "Oh, we want to talk to you," blah 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 blah. And I'm like, "Talk to me about what?" And they're like, "Oh, we have some questions. You're not in trouble." I said, "You know what? I'm not talking to anybody. You wake me up from sleep. I'm sleeping, and you just ambush me essentially. I'm not ready to just sit and be interrogated right now. I'm gonna have a lawyer contact you." They're like, "Oh, if you contact a lawyer, things are gonna get worse for you." I'm like, how can those two things be consistent? How can I'm not in trouble to it's only gonna get worse? How can something get worse if there's no issue at all to begin with?
Now, what were they? Robo-cops there? Were they all dressed up with their helmets and their vests and their M16s or whatever? What were they? What were they waving at you?
Like if I understand if there is like some kind of suspicion, come plain clothed people. They come plain clothed to people's houses all the time. Send one or two people plain clothed if you really, really think there's something.
Wait. No. Police don't come to my house plain clothes ever, okay? The FBI's been to my house once, and I told them, get out of the driveway. I got to get to traffic court in Amherst. Give me your card, and, I'll call you up later, and we'll see what we're going to talk about here. I mean, I'm older and meaner and tougher than you are, but no, plainclothesmen don't come to my house every day and ask me things. Honest, that's not the average person's experience in this country, Abraham. Maybe you're not in the same country as me. Maybe is that what it is? I don't know. Somebody's got to tell me. Bob, tell us. I mean, what is this?
We all know the answer. It's because, Abraham is a person of color and he is a Muslim. And that is the way our community members are treated time and time again. And until we stop seeing it as something that is routine or almost normal. As a matter of fact, Peter, I'll tell you that when we do our intakes, when we take in information, when people call us for assistance, and we have, let's say, interns or whatnot, we actually train people never to ask, did anything abnormal happen? Because our folks have been so conditioned to think that things are normal that they won't recognize things are not normal anymore for them, right? So we have to ask specific questions. And you're absolutely right. This idea of being able to talk back to a law enforcement agent, we're still battling in our community, telling people, you don't need to let them in your door. And I'm glad that you mentioned the fact of how you took action and you just told them, hey, you want to talk to me, leave your business card in the mailbox, because that's exactly what we tell people to do. People shouldn't be knocking on your door. You don't have to open for them, not even for a question, unless they have a valid search warrant, right? And one of the things that we do with Care New York is we actually teach people what their rights are. And we try to impress upon them exactly what you just said, Peter, and that is this is not normal, right? You shouldn't be treated like this. You are entitled to equal rights under the law, just like everybody else, regardless of being a person of color, but regardless of you being Muslim, right? You don't deserve profiling, and profiling is what we have. And by the way, Peter, I will tell you that when we are not advocates for ourselves, that's when things get worse. When we are not loud about it, when we do not stand up against the injustice that our own community faces, then we have young men like Abraham who grow up under, this idea that this is pretty routine and, it's okay if they do this so long as they don't cross that line. No, it's not okay at all to be treated like this. For goodness sakes, you can't go into an airport and go into secondary screening room without seeing all people that look like myself and Abraham. Why? These people are doctors, lawyers, well-educated people, people who serve the community, people who pay their taxes, people who've never done anything. And there's one thing to say, we are questioning someone because of a suspicious activity, which is what Abraham's trying to say. If there is, a reasonable investigation going because of a specific act, right? But that's not the way it is within our community. We get targeted simply because of our names, like in this voter suppression issue. We get targeted because of our national origin. If you're originally from Yemen or you're originally from this or that Arab country, we get targeted. You originally began this show talking about, essentially what is systemic racism on a government level. We have the Muslim ban and the African bans, right? We had NSEERS, the National System for Registry for Entering and Exiting the United States, in which Muslim men of a certain age had to register with the government if they were immigrants, and they had to keep the government aware of every place that they traveled to or went to, or else they could get deported. And as a matter of fact, brother, when people went and they were required to go register with the government, those with any kind of discrepancy in their documentation were deported. They were just simply taken off the street. People were calling our offices and other civil rights organizations and saying, you know, my brother, my husband went in to register because that's what they told him he has to do, and he hasn't come back, and we don't know where he is. Right? So this was normal. And, you know, this is not just in the past. NCERS was eventually shut down, and it was shut down because not a single case of security related matter ever came out of that. Not a single one. Yet you uprooted people's lives and you made them feel like secondary, worse than secondary citizens, right? You treated them like criminals just because of their faith or their national origin. That is what xenophobia is. That is Islamophobia at its height.
Well, this just isn't the country I thought we lived in. I mean, it really isn't. I'm shocked. I'm appalled. I'm stunned by this. And I'm not that easily shocked, but this to me is amazing. And you know, I have to say, I'm better than this. You're better than this. We're better than this. This country is better than this. This is not the promise of this country. I mean, have we got the plaque from the Statue of Liberty, the Emma Lazarus poem? Can we put that up here? You know, you don't have to read it now, but, you know, this is what immigrants see, hear, do. This is how they're welcome to this country. It says immigrants are welcome, you know, we'll take everyone. You live in a law-abiding manner, and we want people who are yearning to live free. If this is going to be the way our country operates, then maybe we got to take that plaque down and send it back to France. Okay, we have. I've just been notified that we have questions and comments, and we're talking about sharing them. I think that's a good idea. We're a little long at this point in time, but I'm willing to go a little longer, and maybe we can open up phone line or something like that. Abraham, have you got anything more you want to add?
Did we discuss the Yemen field incident?
Yeah. Okay, because that's a nice visual. I met and bought lunch for 3 councilmen in Lackawanna sometime in the last year. And I said, you know, you guys got terrible race, ethnic, religious problems, disharmony. You ought to do something about it. And they kind of said, well, we could do some committees and do this and that. And I said, geez, I'll help you if I can. And I said, but, you know, you got a big problem here. I'm working with CARE, and they're going to put out a press release asking for an investigation of an individual that you recently appointed to the Common Council. That's problematic to me. It's a problem for you. I don't know how you're going to deal with it. Well, at 8 o'clock the next morning, they dealt with it by knocking the sign down at Yemen soccer field. Abraham, tell us a little bit about Yemen Field. I guess, you know, you're not old enough.
Yeah.
It's been Yemen Field since the early 80s. That's a holy shrine. That's hallowed ground. And about the only good part I can say about this, there was such a hue and a cry, and there were so many phone calls, et cetera, that sign was back up by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, dented though it was. And let's show those 2 pictures, because I think this is kind of cool. Let's show the picture of the guys putting the sign back up, if we've got that. Because you know what? They loved it. These were 2 city workers that knew, or 3 city workers that knew what had happened was wrong. There was no reason to knock this down other than to fire a shot across the bow, I think. Have we got that? There's a picture of the gentleman putting the sign back up at Yemen Field. That should be up in the drive there. And then there's another picture of the beat-up sign that they put back up. And I think it's still up, but, you know, it's worse for the wear. And give us a moment on that. But Afaf, you know, while we're digging out the sign, I mean, am I wrong? Is this a shot? Was this just a coincidence? You know, that I notified these councilmen that, you know, there were going to be some repercussions. And the next day, suddenly at 8 o'clock in the morning, first thing, there was nothing else for the city of Lackawanna to do but to knock down the sign at Yemen Field. What's your take on that, Afaf?
My take is that given everything that occurs and that we see and hear every single day with regards to the Muslim community, there's no such thing as coincidence. This got taken down, we believe, purposefully, right? And the timing is just too hard to ignore. Having said that, I can't say that there's a conclusive investigation about it. I hope that one is initiated just to see what happened. There must be cameras, maybe, possibly, but just really sort of understanding who had the authority to do that and who actually took on the action of knocking it down is worth an investigation, in my opinion. But no, I don't believe that it's a coincidence. But Peter, I'll also say one thing while you guys are looking for that photo. And you alluded to it by saying that there were other workers that came that realized this was not cool and that they put up the sign. You know, as bad as things are, there is an immense amount of allyship across every supposed imaginary line. I say an imaginary line because I don't think that our faith or that our ethnicity or that our skin color sets up lines, right? It's only bigotry and hatred that sets up lines. We're all one human family. And we've seen tremendous allyship. As a matter of fact, if you recall, during the last election cycle, when there was talk about a registry system for Muslims, right? We wouldn't have been the first in its case. I already mentioned NCers. But if there was the supposed idea that potentially all Muslims would have to be registered with the government, that should be horrific to anyone. Because when you think about that, the first thing that comes to my mind is the atrocities of the Holocaust.
It's Nazi
right?
Germany. That's what it is, obviously.
What we saw was that a lot of people said, if you pull that move, we will be the first to register right next to our Muslim neighbors. Right? So there is tremendous allyship. I have been working, for example, with the Japanese American community who recognize what is happening within the Muslim community was the same thing that happened to them before they were interned, right? In concentration camps across our country. The Muslim ban is really, you know, if you think about it, the Chinese also went through that with the Chinese Exclusion Act, something my kids are just learning about in social studies now. So we've seen, I mean, this nation, we like to pretend that, you know, we're shocked by all this. But when we really think about it, Peter, I mean, isn't a large part of our nation, the way that it was built, has been built on very racist, systemic bigotry. And Muslims now are a primary target, as are other people of color, and in particular, Black Americans. And the kind of discrimination that we're seeing, when I talk about profiling at an airport, it's the same thing as stop and frisk or, you know, driving while Black in a rich neighborhood. It's the same phenomenon, but targeting a different community. And they're not completely separate, I should add, because many of our Muslim community members are Black themselves.
I think, do we have that picture up live now? Is that out there? I guess it is. Okay. I mean, this is a happy time, just so you know. These guys were really delighted to be putting the sign back up. And there were about a dozen of us there. I shot a couple of snaps of this. Yeah, not everybody agrees with dumb decisions that were made somewhere to discriminate. And I do agree with you. You know, part of our original sin in this country was slavery. There were a huge number of compromises made to slavers to hold the country and to build it originally, and they really have hamstrung us since then. I kind of hope we're better than some of the things that we see and have seen. If you get a shot, gentlemen, you engineers on this, tee up the other Yemen field sign, a close-up, which shows how beat up it is. Never going to happen. Okay, Peter, we'll worry about that later. Let's. We do have questions, comments, etc. What we got by way of questions, Peter?
We've got a lot here. And what we have been doing for the last little while, we've got a number of people who've tuned in with us. And the comments might be a little bit away from the purpose of the show, but there's certainly someone expressing their viewpoints. We've got a gentleman, and I want to go back here because it bears hearing from the beginning. A lot of people were here saying that a lot of people were criticizing and. Others said, just don't listen. It's fine. But I think we open this, and I hate to sound so confused, but I have some observations here. People were contacting us about what this podcast is about. Again, it's what we are calling xenophobia in Lackawanna is related to the suppression of votes and other suppressions and things that are done sometimes commonly to the Muslim community there. So that's the background. Jim Costanzo says he's had the opportunity to meet with Pete on several occasions. A number of people took Mr. Reese to account on this. There's just so many comments I can't respond with. And
shoot away.
All right, Kenneth Cutt says, I have no clue what I'm listening to, so I can't say anything yet. And adds with that, another leftist BS organization. So there's just so much here, but hang on. Tim Heater says, our schools can't even say the Pledge of Allegiance because it is offensive to some. Is that a lawsuit?
We're a little far afield. By the way, for the gentleman or person who didn't understand what we were talking about, you go re-wrap to the beginning and watch it again.
They have to wait till the show's over to do that.
Yeah, but you must have joined in progress,
right.
Because we tried to start out and lead up and explain what's going on.
I think it's difficult to understand the whole context of what we're talking about without seeing the actual list. If you actually see this list of voters, it's literally like
right.
12 pages of just like
a lot of the people who are commenting also come from the side of the political spectrum who are presently questioning the validity of the entire election for voter suppression, voter fraud, other things. So an issue like this should be seen as something very serious. One comment came from Tim Heater, and he wanted to call in. One thing to remember: this is America, a country founded by Christian beliefs, and that has never been a secret. If you do not believe in the Christian beliefs, why come here?
This country wasn't founded on Christian beliefs.
Freedom of religion.
Our freedom of religion, period, number one. In fact, the original colonies were formed by refugees who fled Europe because of religious discrimination. And in truth, the founding fathers probably were not Christians. They were deists. They believed in a supreme being, but they weren't necessarily followers of Christ. And by the way, in terms of my own personal beliefs, I'm probably closer to that than anything else. I consider myself to be a recovering Catholic. I was raised Catholic.
I think in common law they taught us that the government, there shall not be an establishment. The government will not work to establish religion. Like government and religion separate. Like I think they taught us that in second grade too. But that was one of the concepts that we learned in law school. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Pete?
Before Pete cuts in with that, we've got just so many comments here that are questioning, for instance, one that questions CARE, some information from another organization on them. My idea is let's allow Afaf to respond initially to what we've been saying here, because I see her there on the line, and I think it's important to give her an opportunity to start engaging.
Yeah, I think this is some sort of commie organization, CARE. So let's get some explanation of that.
Yeah. So look, I mean, CARE is not a new organization. We've been around for more than 2 decades. And for those that want to know, what our primary mission is to defend civil liberties based on the U.S. Constitution, that same U.S. Constitution that everybody, seeks protection from, every American citizen seeks protection from, right? And I actually became an attorney, Peter, because of my deep respect for our laws and for our Constitution and for the freedom and the ability that, if somebody tries to violate those laws, we actually have a judicial system in which to seek recourse, right? And you can get politically involved and seek recourse in that way as well, right? So that's on a personal level. So what CARE does is we defend civil liberties by taking on matters of discrimination. And let me tell you, for those that think that CARE's work is either something that's anti-American, let me say this. Behind every stat and general sentence that I say, there's a real life that is being impacted, right? And so one case that has haunted me for a long time, it's not a New York case, but it's one that has really haunted me. I began some of the discussion on xenophobia and Islamophobia by talking about the bullying that happens in school. And we have this one case. We have a boy whose name is Jacob. Not an overtly Muslim or Arab sounding name, but he was actually from a Muslim family. And when his peers found out that he was Muslim, he was taunted, he was assaulted, he was bullied, Eventually, the violence grew. He was choked, I believe, on a school bus. He went to the hospital twice with a concussion because he was brutalized. And his school did not, we believe, do anything to help him and to save him. Eventually, Jacob committed suicide. Jacob was like 11 years old. Okay. I bring this matter up because people want to discredit, CARE and the work that we do. But let me tell you something. When you have done everything right in this country, when you have worked all your life, when you respect the law, when you are a person who is conscientious of your morals, when you are a good person to your neighbors, and yet you try to fly or to bring in your family from a different country and are denied the simplicity of being able to do the common everyday things that other people do simply because you have a Muslim sounding name, that is a threat to this entire country. That is a threat to our democracy. It is a threat to our values. It is a threat, by the way, to Christian values, just as it is a threat to all people of conscience, whether or not you have a religion, right? And so this idea that this is bull, that this is not happening, well, maybe people need to, number one, take a bit more of a civics class and a history class to understand how prevalent this is. And number two, understand that there are real life people who are going through this. I'm not litigating from imaginary figures. These are not imaginary people. These are not imaginary stories. This is things that are going on every single day with people. I wish that we didn't have to exist. As a matter of fact, one person I was interviewing once for a position said, what's your ultimate goal? I said, my ultimate goal is not to be needed because I don't want to face the kind of stories that we see every single day, right? It was heartbreaking for me to go into that Muslim family of the imam and the assistant who was murdered, execution style, bullet in the head in broad daylight coming out of a masjid, and going into their house and saying, listen, we know you don't know anything about the criminal justice system. Let us walk you through it and be there for you in the next 2 to 3 years in which, you are going to be dealing with the horrors of what just happened to you, right? Those people didn't deserve it. These people that face these things, whether you're talking about the 11-year-old or you're talking about the 75-year-old imam, a priest in his masjid, what would be the equivalent of a priest, every time he flies, they pull him off of a plane. They meet him with armed agents. Why? Why is that? He didn't do anything wrong. If he had done anything wrong, obviously, they would have arrested him. But every time he flies, to the point where his wife is crying and refuses to fly with him anywhere because of the degradation and humiliation. No American deserves that, regardless of your faith. And for those, that really want to understand what this means, just think about it happening to you. Stop otherizing people. Stop, imagining that this doesn't happen. This happens because there is a hatred and a bigotry when you otherize people and you take away their humanity. And that leads to even worse things. And CARE is here to make sure that we are advocates and we're vocal and we don't allow these things to happen, because if it can happen to us, it can one day happen to you, God forbid. And everyone should be concerned about that. This is our country just as much as it is everybody else's. People need to understand that and accept it and really get back to their own history, because guess what? You were from a different country at one point too. Everyone came here from a different country. Let's be blunt about it, Peter. So this idea of we're Americans and somehow you're less American because you came from a different country, guess what? You just described yourself, buddy. So let's really sort of be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest to what this nation is, but also what it can be. And let's be honest about our love for this country and why we love it so much. It's because of the freedoms that we love it so much. It's because of the opportunities that we love it so much. It's because, I have a brother who joined the military, right? This is what this country is about. This, what you put up on the Statue of Liberty. This idea that anyone can come here, and if you live by the rules and the laws of this country, and you are a respectable person, and that you do what's right, and you work hard, and you stay out of trouble, that every opportunity will be granted to you, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your religion.
Wow. And just so you know, my father got here in 1913, okay? And the Yemeni Muslim community in Lackawanna dates back to the 1890s. So I always have been thankful that the people of Lackawanna allowed us to come to their country. You know, this to my mind's eye, what's important here is this country lives up and acts as if it believes the words that it says. I cannot allow this sort of injustice to happen in my country. I think it was Martin Luther King who said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Injustice in Lackawanna is injustice in North Buffalo where I live. And it's just not acceptable to me. Now, FOF, what can we do to help care? I mean, do you need volunteer lawyers? Let's say I have a friend who's a real estate lawyer, okay, and he's never been to court in his life, but he's licensed to practice law. Can that person be of value to you?
Of course they can. So, again, I'm with Care New York, the New York chapter. We certainly don't have the kind of resources that we wish to have, considering all that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And there are a lot of different ways. Resources are always, in a tight crunch with us, and that's human resources as well as monetary resources, right? So, first of all, by the way, if anyone wants to check out, Care New York's work, please go to our website. You're welcome to check us out. It's www.cair-ny.org. Again, that's cair-ny.org. And so if you want to help, obviously by donating, you can. We are a registered 501c3, a nonprofit. Our money goes right back into services. We don't charge anyone for the work that we do. We do trainings for your community. You can invite us into your community. Let us teach people like Brother Abraham and his family and others how to handle discriminatory matters when they see it, how to handle, how they should respond if they do get profiled, whether it's at the airport or in their home or in their school for that matter. So that's important as well. And then the other part of what you were talking about, Peter, skill sets are a blessing, and skill sets come with different opportunities that you have, or maybe it's some innate that you have a talent. So for example, we have volunteer graphic designers who help us with our graphics. We need volunteers who are good writers so that they can help us make out publications that educate people on their rights, for example. And yes, for those lawyers as well, even the real estate guy that you were just talking about. Well, one of the situations that we deal with from time to time is that you'll have a Muslim community go into a new area and they want to build a mosque, a masjid. And there is construction opposition oftentimes, and it could get very creative and it'll take some, litigation. And so dealing with somebody who understands real estate in that area can become very helpful. We do have volunteer attorneys. We often actually litigate with partners simply because of the resource intensiveness of litigation, especially when you're suing the government, right? We have sued New York City, NYPD. We've sued federal government for the watch list that they have on Muslims, right? And so that all takes resources. So we ask people to donate their time, their skill sets, and their money to the degree possible to Care New York or your local chapter, wherever you may be.
All right. Very good. Something that just came to mind. Can you educate my community, which is not predominantly Muslim? By the way, though, I got to tell you, I live in a really posh, fancy schmancy neighborhood. One couple, a physician, recently sold a house, $1 million house. That's a lot of money in Buffalo, by the way. That's a big house here. And guess what? He was a Muslim. But, there's Muslims living in my neighborhood. But I'm talking about,
Time to pack up.
There goes the neighborhood, right? He was living in the nicest house. The point is, I'm from a predominantly white Anglo type community. I mean, let's face it. Even though I'm Polish by ethnic background, both sides. That's the predominant culture that I live in. How about educating my community? I mean, people who aren't Muslims. Do you do anything along the lines of educating us? And perhaps some of the people who are calling in are calling us a bunch of commie, antichrists or whatever it is.
Two things I want to say about that. For those that don't know Muslims, and have said that America is founded on Christian principles, and for those of you that we just finished off Christmas, right? So that's a celebration of Jesus. May God's peace and blessings upon him. For those that may be a little bit shocked to hear me say something like "May God's peace and blessings upon him," just as a 101, Islam 101. Muslims actually believe in Jesus. We believe in all of our messengers and prophets. Of course, there's slight differences in our faith. But having said that, you will see Muslims respect Christians and Christian principles very much, because that is really a part of our faith as well. Just as an FYI side, Peter. Having said that, do we educate people who are non-Muslim? Look, we don't just serve Muslims, and I'll be happy to train, and I have done so. For example, I'll give you, so we've had a museum who was actually doing an exhibit, for example, on modest dress, right? And those were coming from Muslim countries and all around the world. They saw that their employees, they didn't have a single Muslim employee. So how is it that they were going to be talking about, Muslims and why they dress Islamically? So they invited us to do a one-on-one training, right? I will be happy to speak anywhere for anyone who wants to learn either about basics on Muslims, or if you need a training. Look, the constitutional rights that we are talking about, we're not asking them to apply just for Muslims. We're asking for the same rules to apply to everyone equally. So whether or not you're Muslim, you need to know your rights. And you can count on an organization like CARE New York who will come to your community and do it for free. We have people, including BLM protesters, for example. We have one client who, while he was on camera, giving an interview to a news channel as to why he was there. This is, by the way, in Buffalo, so not far away from you guys. He was wrestled to the ground. There was just a huge rush of officers, right? And they just wrestled him to the ground and arrested him while he was doing nothing but talking to a reporter. It all got caught on camera. Yeah, so all of this is happening, FYI, on a daily basis, like I said. And if you need to know what your rights are, then call us. We'll be happy to do an online workshop. We'll be happy to, teach people the same constitutional rights that we hope to be able to rely upon, with the same equality that we seek for ourselves.
Afaf, this is Peter again, and I have a question for you. I just want to make a point about a couple of things. I've just been fielding a lot of the comments, and initially I probably sounded a little distressed. I'm an immigrant. I came to this country 18 years ago. I went through the process. I became an American, or I'm not an American citizen yet. So I'm an immigrant. I am from another country, and I don't experience...
Which country is that?
Is Canada, eh?
Eh?
So, and I am Canadian. But
forget it, Peter.
I have to be very careful, because I don't want to identify as Canadian any longer. I love being in America, just as you love being an American. And you are an American who is a Muslim. First of all, our country was not founded on Christianity. And a classic example of that belief comes from several weeks ago. Many of you may have seen that a church up in Wisconsin was granted, this is how it was praised, a church was granted a whites-only exemption, that they could be whites only. And people were in outrage, but nobody looked at what they were. They weren't a Christian church. Right away, we think it's a Christian organization that's decided to be whites only. This was a belief structure that derives from Germany, from the Nordic peoples, from the time of Thor. We see him as a superhero, but that's all the old tale, so to speak, of the gods, the Nordic gods. This all derived from that. This was the foundation of what created Nazi Germany's National Socialism. But everyone I saw reacting to this was saying, we're acting like a Christian church was whites only. Now, so we're not founded on Christianity. We're founded on a freedom of religion. And we walked in on a people who already lived here and had their own religion. And the most important thing is I've been fielding these comments from several people who are on a show here at Yowowa Media Studios that draws equal ire and attack from others for having them on for their points of view. So you get this group that comes in here, and they're called, I'm not going to identify the group, but they come in and they get a lot of people really upset with them expressing their views. And I'm responding to every one of them, and I'm saying, if you don't want to watch it, don't. But this is free speech. These are Americans, not Muslims. And to conclude, just so you know, some months ago, I put a quote up from the Quran, which is a beautiful book. And as a Christian, I can see the corollary, the parallels in it. And I put a quote up, but I didn't identify where it was from. And I said, type like if you agree with the scripture. And at least 40 people immediately liked it. And then when I said it was from the Quran, you could see a change in the number of likes. And the thing is, we need to see the beauty. and we need to see the good in everyone. Your brother defended this country as any Anglo-Saxon or person of color might have done. Traditionally, your brother was part of was part of our military. God bless him for that, just as I asked God to bless all those who serve to protect our country. Thank you for speaking today. Thank you for being a voice. And we would hope at some point our studio could have you in to host a discussion about Islamophobia further and allow these people to have more interaction with you to learn.
You know what?
I hope that opportunity
Go
to
ahead,
come
Saf.
as well. Thank you so much. Now, saying I hope that opportunity does in fact come. Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate it. And, for all those that have been listening, whether or not you agree, we can at least, I hope, agree on one thing. And that is what Peter was talking about, the freedom of speech and expression and being able to speak like this respectfully to one another without the underlying hatred. Right? Just listening to one another is the first step in educating one another and hopefully seeing the humanity that we all contain. Because truth is I can disagree with you, but that doesn't make you void of humanity. That doesn't make you ineligible for our constitutional rights. And that is really what CARE's mission is, what CARE's work is. And that is what, on a personal level, I simply believe. As human beings, we owe that to each other. Whether we're talking about America or not, we at least owe that much to one another.
I think I'm going to bring this show to a close because we've run a long time. We've gone at least a half hour, I think, over what we anticipated. There's plenty of material here. I think we ought to be talking or thinking about a future show as other things develop. But let me leave you with this thought. I believe that the founding principle of every religion is the golden rule, which is doing unto others as you'd like to have them do unto you. And I guess if you want a religious print, that's when I'm a golden ruler, okay? And I just don't understand it. People don't understand that. It just it makes my head spin. And on that, this is Peter Reese closing this down for WNY Reach for today. We hope to see you again. We hope that we've stimulated a lot of thought, and let's see where we go from here. I wish everyone a happy holiday season, and we're signing off.